Oh.
I'm very conscious when I do my hair, but I really look at the back of my head when I'm doing my hair. I'm a little self-conscious that.
Right. Okay.
Just to another room, we have.
I shouldn't be talking about that.
So you guys doing something spring. Oh, is that what we're waiting for?
Are we that way? It's okay. So, I mean, welcome. I am Regent Lisa Kehokaloli Shower, and I want to welcome everyone to the Board of Regents Finance and Compliance Committee meeting. I believe that we are now live on YouTube. I have one agenda item. If this works with our ability to move a couple items around. So Chair Dickinson, I'd like to move our two action items, the WSU Vancouver Life Science Building request for increase in the project budget and the WSU Pullman Agricultural Research Services Plant Bioscience Building ground lease up prior to the informational items.
That works. Thank you very much.
Okay. With that, I'd like to introduce, we have a team ready to address both the first and the second future action items. So I'd like to introduce Vice President for Finance and Administration and CFO Stacey Pearson, Associate Vice President for Facilities Olivia Yang, and WSU Vancouver Chancellor Melnick.
Olivia is online.
Okay.
On phone.
I thought that I did not see Olivia here with us, so. All right, so with that, I will pass the item over to you.
Yes, so we wanted to take this moment to do an introduction to my colleague seated, who is not Olivia Yang, seated to my left. As you know, after 24 years, Lynn Ballanter left us in June, and we are so excited to welcome Jenny Chambers-Taube to our campus. Jenny comes to us immediately from the Southern California University of Health Sciences, but is very familiar with our metro area, having worked at Merrillhurst and Portland State and Willamette. I know I was forgetting one. So we wanted to give her, and she has been very involved in what we're bringing to you today. So we wanted to give her an opportunity to join us and introduce her to you all today.
Welcome. Thank you. Great. I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. So we were bringing back to you a request to increase the project budget for the Vancouver Life Sciences Building. This is for a different reason, though. This is on the original project scope. You'll recall in January, we brought an additional scope to do the greenhouse and have funding so that we could start that planning and design. This is related to the original scope and is directly related to things that you've been reading about in the news. In terms of supply chain and cost increases, I think about 12 to 15% cost increase is what we're seeing. So the teams got together and have been doing a lot of what we call value added or value engineering to determine what can come out of the scope and what else can we do about that. And certainly Olivia's staff and Jenny and her staff were involved in this. And I think it was very impressive the work that they did because they did identify additional cost savings. However, I think the way it was described to me, we will end up with a shelled building or more or less a mostly shelled building. And we thought, well, that's probably not going to be okay. So I'm going to let Jenny and Olivia, if you have questions, describe briefly the process that they went through. And then we will be seeking delegated authority to increase the project budget by $4.5 million to be funded from the Vancouver campus reserves.
Nope, that was great.
Yeah.
Any comments?
Well,
Go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Question, but I can speak to the work that the project team has been doing for several months, taking a look at all of the different costs, both materials, supplies, and trying to ensure that the functionality of the building remains intact, as well as the vision that we had for the building. So we were able to change some types of material. So rather than using stainless steel in certain areas, perhaps we're using aluminum. And I should place a caveat, that could be backwards. I'm not an expert in all of the material ideas. We took some areas that would have been built-in seating, and instead there'll be a table and chairs. But again, we're still going to build the same size of building, the same scope of building, and it will also meet our gold LEED standard. We've kept that as a top priority in any type of cost savings. There will be 3 areas that will be shelled. The shelling of those spaces simply means that they'll have a floor and a ceiling and walls, but they won't have any cabinetry, any plumbing or electrical would be capped. It wouldn't be a functioning space. But we were able to prioritize that in a way that allows us to come back later and finish those spaces, and it isn't that detrimental to the ability to open and function. So as an example, we have 3 flex space labs. We will shell one of those 3. And so upon opening, the 2 that are finished will be quite sufficient for our needs. The other items we're able to value engineer out at least $1 million, holding it right around $1 million. So through that work, as Stacy mentioned, we still need another 4.5 in order to complete the building.
When Stacy first called to have this conversation with us, she said, "Hi, Olivia." She said, "Make me comfortable with this." And I said, "No, we shouldn't be comfortable with it. You know, we have to deal, but we do have to deal with rising costs, and we can't shell a third of our building." And one thing that I would say about the finance for this is that I do believe that at WSU Vancouver, we have been very strong stewards of our resources and particularly of our reserves. And so this is the $4.5 million is still only a fraction of the reserves that we have built up in the last decade. So to that degree, I hate that we have to do it, but I do feel comfortable that we have the resources available to us on our campus to do it. Olivia, I think I stepped in when you were about to speak. Maybe not.
No, I was, well, sorry, we're late. I thought we were much later. As the chancellor said, this is a project where if we did not add the additional funding, we would have a building that has much of it shelled. The fact that this is happening to us, I might say, is hopefully no big surprise to everyone, given the really it's a nationwide severe disruption of labor pool and the supply chain disruptions. So we're very careful about moving forward with this process and are being very disciplined about how rigorously we intend to watch the cost. I think Stacy thinks I'm a very frugal person. I'm very proud of that. And so if there's a way to not do something that can be done later, if we can defer the cost so that we can stay well within the additional budget, you can be assured that all of us, the project team, Jason is here, he's the project manager, working with Jenny and the chancellor and with Stacy, that we will be as diligent as possible in keeping the cost down. We have not done this before. We've always kept to the budget. And so I don't know if I'm embarrassed or what to be here today. But as the chancellor's pointed out, it's a difficult spot to not finish portions of the building. So if there are questions, we would be happy to answer.
So during our pre-conversation regarding this topic, one of the questions that I asked, and I was hoping Chancellor Natsummer, you could address, is around the development space. So the idea of value engineering is how do we create a building that maybe meets the budget and not anticipating the escalation of costs. The development efforts have been significant. So the idea of reducing the building size within that value engineering space might mean an impact to development, the fundraising efforts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And we are so far along in the process that just reducing the actual size of the building would probably cost more than the $4.5 million that we're talking about now. Ideally, we will not ultimately use the $4.5 million. We still have contingency funds that if we don't use, we'll go back to reimburse what we take out of reserves. And as you pointed out, we have a whole fundraising piece that is going on as well. We've raised just about $1 million towards that goal already. And it is our top priority. President Schultz has been tireless in helping us with that as well. And so our goal, that is part of our goal. But interestingly, one of the issues when we looked at the spaces that we would have to shelve, a number of them were already named spaces that donors had supported, which created some anxiety for us as well in trying to figure out the best way to approach this.
I have a question with the 10 million. Appreciate the 1 million that's been raised. What's the feasibility truly of 10 million, and then the timing in which you think you can accomplish that?
I think it's feasible. What we have seen so far that has been truly interesting is that we're getting six-figure gifts from people who have never given to WSU Vancouver before. The foundation, we're very appreciative of this. At the last trustees meeting, let us present on the building. When the region, as you know, we presented to the Regents when you all were in Vancouver. And on that day, I texted Jennifer as we were starting this 2:30 meeting, and she said, "I'm just getting back to my office now. There were so many people who were interested in hearing more." So there's still a fair amount of cultivation that has to happen with our prospects, but we are seeing a much broader group of people giving to this project. We don't have a lot of history of building academic buildings that are supported by both the state and philanthropy. And so there's this whole level of educating our donors that we have to do as part of this. But the level of excitement has been just heartwarming, amazing to me. And so I really think that we have this project, that we will meet the goals. I don't know if there's any firm deadline to this, except that if a building is 3 or 4 years old and you're still raising money for it, it's not where donors' hearts are going to be. They're going to be looking at what the next new thing is. So I think there is a timeline on this, but I don't think it's particularly fixed.
Other questions? Just keep in mind, this will be an action item for tomorrow's board meeting.
I just wanted to say that to Olivia in particular, that I am a total budget hawk and have been so impressed with how you have performed over time and how you have managed our physical infrastructure, that I at least have as little concern as I possibly could have with your ability to try to manage this to the greatest extent possible. So I hope you won't be embarrassed and will feel like we we understand and trust you to, you know, try to get this in, hopefully under the new budget, but at least you're coming to us with the worst news at this point, which is helpful. And also thank you, Mel, for you and your team having managed your reserves prudently, so that there is a place to go in this time of need.
Thank you. On that,
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
I was just going to echo what Heather said. As someone who is responsible for millions and millions and millions of square feet globally, we're seeing this everywhere in all of our projects. My team has delivered over 50 million square feet of office space for Amazon in the past 20 years. We've never had to go back for a budget uplift until just recently. So it's happening everywhere. You're not alone. And just wanted you to know that we appreciate your concern and conscientiousness, but no need to be embarrassed. Thank you.
John's right there with you, being embarrassed too, right? Perfect record ruined.
Regent Lincoln.
I would add on to their comments that I think our mindset is you have to build buildings that we need in the future, not necessarily what you need today. So I commend you for keeping the footprint best you can within the scope you set out. And again, echo that your prudence in the reserves has pulled the rabbit out of a hat here, I think. And then I would lean toward yes tomorrow. So I commend your team and Stacy's team. Olivia.
I was curious if you could share, I think I heard a number recently about how many value engineering or value added adjustments you had made, and if you could reiterate that or talk about how you have considered student priorities when you're determining, and of course, it's not just student priorities, but I'm just curious how you situated, you know, students' concerns with the new building and retaining those spaces and retaining the value that students would hope to see.
So I can start with that. We have over 1,000 ideas that we've come up with throughout the project because we knew the budget was going to be tight from the beginning. And we've implemented some of those were not implemented for various reasons. At the very beginning of the project, we had a lot of effort put forth in what was the goals of the project, and that included student involvement, and that included students were surveyed, and we created some I guess project guidelines that whenever we have a concern or there's an adjustment to the budget or adjustment to the project itself, we always go back to those guidelines and say, are we meeting the mission of the building and of the project? And we knew that when we had to continue to potentially cut more square footage, we were definitely cutting into that mission. And so that's when Mel and Jenny kind of stepped in and Stacy got involved, and we looked at, do we need to relook at how we are addressing this budget problem?
Thank you, that's reassuring to hear.
Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
All right, the next future action item is the WSU Pullman Agricultural Research Services, WSU Plant Bioscience Building Ground Lease. I think it's most of our same team, in addition to Associate Vice President for Finance, Matt Skinner. Matt is actually at a conference.
Matt is, yes, he's at
Okay.
the, he's representing John and I at the Pac12 meetings. So thank you. And actually, this is an action item. It's another one that is time sensitive where a decision needs to be made. And I think you'll find that it's good news because we're seeking authorization for a ground lease for our property where we're going to build the USDA agricultural research building that is funded almost $105 million from the federal government. And we're going to put it in that location of Johnson Hall where we received state funding to take that building down. And then the new facility will be built there. But because it's likely to be a 99-year lease, the value of the property indicates that it'll probably be over worth that value of $5 million in that time frame, and that is why Regents approval is required. So we will be seeking authority to authorize the long-term ground lease to enable USDA ARS to design and build the facility on the Pullman campus, and then delegate the authority to the president or his designee to negotiate and execute that long-term lease. And just a reminder, every time I can bring it up about how this helps our deferred maintenance, when we got that money to take down the old facility, we are responsible for providing the operations and maintenance funds for this new facility, and it will actually cost less than what it costs now to maintain an older facility. So we feel like this is a win all around, but we do need your authority to do that ground lease as the next step so we can get started.
Question. Do we have any say in the design of this building?
Yes, we do. And I can let Olivia speak to that because it will be half occupied. Is it half and half WSU and half USDA staff? Olivia, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I'll start by saying that, as you all know, the relationship that WSU has with USDA ARS is almost 100 years. And it's a very collegial relationship. You really can't tell who is ARS and who is WSU. So along those lines, when the ARS people came to see us almost 3 years ago, they made a big point about the fact that in terms of what the building looks like, they want the building to work for everyone and to make it look like a part of the campus. And so the way that USDA ARS is doing this project, it is the federal version of design build. It is actually managed by the Corps of Engineers, and we facilities, as Jason, Joe Klein, and I, are actually kind of temporary contract staff for ARS to be their on the ground representatives. And as such, we have very close view of the design, both inside and out. Jason in particular is in meetings with on this project daily. And so we have made every effort to make sure that the building works inside the lab modules, et cetera, and that the design is sympathetic to the rec complex and the surrounding campus.
Great. Yeah, my main question was, since we are going to be responsible for the maintenance of our half, you know, that we know that we're optimized it for lower cost, which sounds like we are in a great position to do that.
Yes,
Cool.
we are.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay,
Those are all the action items.
excellent. Don't go anywhere though. Pretty sure you might be on the, maybe?
It's the internal.
Oh, you're right, you're right. Okay. So those are our action items for tomorrow. We will see Stacy back up here. But we do have some information items. And so I'm hoping Chief Audit Executive Heather Lopez can join us for our internal audit update.
Just a new fashion statement.
Sorry.
Just a new fashion statement.
Yes, just thankfully. All right, so I have a brief status update for you. A one pager, it's getting shorter and shorter, trying to be concise. First, to start off with, my team of 6, we're down an auditor, and it is my only IT auditor. So we truly thought that we would have at least another 5 years with him. He truly thought that he would be with us for another 5 years. So there wasn't a succession plan in place yet. So we're working on it right now. I do have some options on the table. We're posting for a full-time replacement and also looking at contracting and short-term solutions to fill the need. There's a lot to do in the area of IT cybersecurity risks and the auditing plans that we had in place and that we've been working on, a lot of follow-up that we are still working on, audits that were in planning stage or ready for engagement, and they're kind of on hold right now until we get these short-term options in place. I am able to work on a few of them myself when I have time. The rest of my team, they're not IT auditors. I have half my team is they're very good at data analytics. And we push a lot of our time and our effort in that area so we can make the most of our resources, looking at large volume of data and doing the data mining off of that to identify the areas where we're going to hone in for field testing. But in the IT audit realm, the reason why I need a specialist in that area is network infrastructure controls, and again, the cybersecurity risks. And we'll get that field here hopefully in the near future. I have talked to a lot of peers, and that's a very difficult position to fill. That's why we're looking at potential of other options. I know a couple of institutions that those positions have been open 6 months to 2 years. So I'll keep you informed as we work on that. Directly related to the IT audit area, one of the audits that had kind of been put on hold a few times was a planned audit of IT governance. And we do have it. My auditor, before he left, he was kind of off and on with some health issues over the last years, but finally got to a point of having an actual plan for deployment. That one is also either ready for me and another auditor to tackle or contract out. So I think of all the audits that we've had on our audit plan in the last couple of years, that one is probably the most important and still needs to proceed and still will proceed. In the follow-up arena, we had a number of outstanding issues in IT realm, but also in other areas like HIPAA compliance. We continue to work on working with management and looking at their corrective action plans to ensure that they're addressed. I will note on the IT area, the list is really coming down. The central IT areas that we had communicated concerns, most all of those are pretty well addressed. We're kind of just at the point of implementation. So a lot of the outstanding recommendations were to establish centrally for the system standards on configuration, standards on different areas that in inventory and stuff, risk assessment, information security. And those standards are now out there in policy, but part of our audits had also said, well, it's not just to have a policy, it's communicating it, ensuring that it goes to the right parties for implementation. And that's where we're at the stage right now. So some of the outstanding in the central, we're working with Sashi's group on that, but also in the distributed across the campuses. One of the policies that took a little bit of time to get implemented was EP 37. And VP Soleil had actually talked about, or Blake had actually talked about that earlier in a presentation. That one did take a little bit to get out there, but that does talk about accountability for IT and where does the responsibility and accountability lie. And it's not just in central, but it's also out in the areas with the deans and the VPs, and those distributed areas is where we're working next to see what the implementation looks like. And then I was going to talk about a couple of the projects if you had any questions so far.
Any questions right now before we continue?
I just had a question on IT. As you know, I always pester you about this. So relative to like where we were the last time we kind of got an update on this, where are we getting? Are we in a better position, worse position, same position? Are we?
I think we're in a better position.
Okay.
Lacking a standard, lacking the expectations, you can't do anything with that. So we are definitely in a better place. And I know we attend a lot of the committee meetings across finance, HR, and the IT, and we hear what's being communicated. So we do feel better in the last year and a half on what is being communicated to the IT environment and those responsible for deployment. So much better.
Good, thank you.
All right, and the other areas that I was going to talk to are as I had said to Regent Shower, is not very exciting. I don't know, some people.
We
think
always
it's very
appreciate
exciting.
when you point out to us.
We have a couple of projects that are that we've been working on. I touched on a couple of these before in the first part of the year. We are using an audit management system that is about to sunset in about 6 months, and it's also hosted on a server. My office is one of those under an agreement with Central ITS on a service level agreement. And we have 2 of our systems. They're hosting our servers. We need to get that out into the cloud. And so we've been working on preparing for that. And it's kind of an overhaul of what our audit programs look like, the way we approach our risk assessments to develop our audit plans, and how we carry out our testing. And again, heavy emphasis and change in more towards taking all the data and doing the analysis off of that and less in-field testing. And our audit system moving to the cloud and updating our version from the sunsetted one to the new one is going to help us a lot, be more efficient in what we're trying to do, cover more with less. At the same time, we're working on, just like everybody else, learning Workday and how it works, and we're building data queries behind the scenes with what data we do have access to, and then working with other partners to try to get access to more data. Again, that access to the full volume of data to be able to mine down. With our audit management system, we have a module on that that allows for more robust analytics, and we're going to take advantage of that. We are very good at Excel. Little hesitant on Access and SQL, but we're pretty outmoded and we need to get with times on the newer tools that are out there. We are taking a look at Tableau. I think it's really a good tool for visualization of the data, and some of the things that we've looked at, we could do a lot with it behind the scenes, but we're exploring what tools the university is already using and partnering now with what we have experience with, and then we'll kind of expand on that. So there's a little bit of work going on that at the same time that we continue to do our data queries and do tests at the transaction level on high risk areas. Our continuous audit approach that is continuous. It keeps going. At the end of the year, we usually have a summary of all the areas that we went to and any of the highlights, and then we bring them back to central management. But most of that is a focus at the transaction level at the department. And then the other thing that April 1st, we're pushing out a fraud risk assessment. We have actually never done a fraud risk assessment, a formal standalone fraud risk assessment. We've had lots of surveys and assessments to a degree to inform our audit plan, but not specific to fraud risk. So that's a really concerted effort, and we're hoping through by getting that out there, and it's gonna, the survey goes out April 1st, but there's several meetings and a lot of brainstorming that goes after it. We're hoping the results from that will help further inform our focus of our resources. When we got access to all of the data, we could come up with hundreds and hundreds of different queries and ways to analyze the data, but we need to make sure that we're focusing on the right places. And it is hopeful that the risk assessment will certainly help us drill down on that and push our deploy our resources more strategically. Along with that, we're also we're going to work with the AG's Office in Compliance on an actual fraud policy. Some of you may be surprised that there isn't a standalone fraud policy at the university. We do have many policies that talk about misuse of resources, if there's missing assets, what the steps are. They're disparate. They're in several policies across in finance, and mostly in finance and personnel. We're going to bring a lot of that together and also add in consequences, because that's pretty important when you have, these are the expectations, and then if not meeting those expectations, what the consequences are. So kind of memorializing that into a standard. That's most of what we've been working on. Any questions?
Appreciate your report. One of the elements that I think is really important about this last piece on the fraud risk assessment and policy is that training component that you'll be able to add in with proactive and responsive.
Right, yeah, we do provide, we still provide training on a regular basis on controls and fraud and other activities. And this activity will help us going in on that as well.
So this is an opportunity for us directly with Heather to be able to ask any questions. She's reports out a couple times every quarter.
2 times a year.
2 times a year. 2 times a year. So take advantage of this moment. It'll be another 6 months. Is there any questions that any of the regions have?
What's your timing on the fraud policy, do you think?
I'm hoping by the end of the fiscal year. Yeah, I want to wait until I have the results from the fraud risk assessment,
Right.
kind of push out some of the analytics, but the university is also working through the compliance office on a conflict of interest policy, a standalone. We do have ethics policies at the university, but this is a standalone conflict of interest, and it'll probably partner and come out around the same time.
Thank you.
I recall, maybe it was the last time Heather presented, or maybe the time before that, but I seem to recall we had some conversation about a ethics training program, and then I remember reading something about how we were doing that now or something. Am I hallucinating and thinking of a different board?
You're not hallucinating.
No, and that might have been addressed in the fall. Ethics is now under the compliance unit under Charles Council.
Okay.
And they have been working on that ethics training, an electronic, a digital version of it.
Right. Okay.
To ensure that it is required and everybody takes it.
Right. Okay. Okay. I did not hallucinate.
There you go. See, sharp as a tack.
Heather, when you do your audits and you have findings, do you rate them on like high, medium, low in terms of what's needs to be addressed like immediately, and look for responses from those that are responsible, that are owners of whatever it is that you're auditing, and then
Right.
find the process to close them out? I'm not as familiar with your audit process. I'm just
Okay.
wondering if you could just describe that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. So kind of a couple of things in there. The only audits that we had rated high, medium, low were the IT audits. Our other audits of operations, finance, compliance areas, we had not traditionally rated, but with our new management system and part of that developing the new audit programs and the way we're pushing it out, I hate using catchy terms, but agile auditing, it's using that approach. The rating is very important, and we're building templates for the reporting and stoplight theory. You know, green, yellow, and red is going to be used on all audits, not just the IT audits. As far as the response from management, we do, and I'll speak mostly to the IT because that's where we applied those ratings, but we'll expand this. We worked with management when we had issues that we were communicating. We put what we thought was the risk, high, medium, low, and then we push it to management, have conversation, and we ask for a corrective action plan and a deadline for implementation. And we have, not very often, but sometimes we have management come back and say, well, yeah, we don't think that's a high risk. We think that's a moderate. And we'll have further conversation until we get to an agreement on that. They need to own it. They need to own the corrective action plan. And we make sure through those communications that that's firm and it's in writing in the audit report.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
All right, 2 other information items: the athletics budget update for fiscal year 2021 and athletics budget update fiscal year 2022. This is an ongoing item that we have each meeting, and I'm pleased to have Stacy here. And I think we'll all be pleased with the report. So.
Yes, thank you. So we have 2 reports for you, information items. We're going to talk about kind of close out fiscal year 21 ending June 30. We just completed the NCAA audit with our staff and Ike Bailey, the independent auditor. So it's time to report to you on that. And again, we're comparing to what was approved in May of 2021, and then we'll talk about where we are on fiscal year 22. I think you have met John Carlo before, but it's been on a Zoom screen. So I'm happy to present him in person. He has found his way to the Tri-Cities for the first time. You should know that John and I are here presenting to you. Our colleagues, Pat Chun and Matt Skinner, are in Las Vegas at the Pac12 conference representing us in the finance meetings. So we're happy to be here. And John's been here.
Or so they say.
Yeah, so they say. Well, I don't know. I have trackers on them.
To the director, we're gonna close out that by the end. Student affairs committee. Nick just called in during our last.
I think he is on the Zoom.
I am. I am here. People are taking attendance. I am.
Sorry
here.
about that, Pat.
Your people are taking attendance. I am here, so.
Pat, I want you to know that I knew you were there before I made that smart.
Thank you.
Thought
Thank
needed
you.
one, just to keep yourself in line there.
And I would like to also mention, John has been here now a little over a year. He escaped Houston during one of those ice storms last year and came to the Palouse. And I just, I want to thank him because he has been so helpful. As you know, we've developed the athletics fiscal recovery plan. He has stayed on top of all of the revenues and expenses and has been immensely helpful in this endeavor. So what we will do is we'll start with fiscal year 21 and I'll have John walk you through, let's see, where do we need? After you hit a button. Okay. Now, okay. Well, maybe you can't see that as well, but all of this is in your packet. I just thought it might be a little bit easier because we have all of the footnotes in there to kind of describe the key differences in both the revenues and expenses and the bottom line.
So I can talk to a couple of the highlights. If you're anything like me, as soon as the slide appears or you turn in your packet, my eyes go directly to the bottom line. You'll notice we did land FY21 with favorability to compare what was approved in May of last year. So at that time, although we were only a handful of months away from the close of the fiscal year, there still was quite a bit of uncertainty related to COVID-19 where we would finish. But we were able to land favorable to what was approved in May. Call a couple of highlights in both revenues and expenses. Revenue-wise, on the contribution side, Mitch Straub and his team at the CAF was able to close out the fiscal year very, very strong in donations related to season football tickets. So we saw improvement there. The other piece, at the time that we presented in May, there was still quite a bit of ongoing conversations at the Pac12 with our media partners in negotiations with missed contests and what the ramifications were going to be for our distribution for that. Those conversations landed much more favorably than we anticipated, which allowed us to overall boost our distribution and was a significant contributor in our revenue landing favorably. Moving to the expense side, really that's the lion's share where our improvement came to fruition. I'll call attention to two major areas there. Our sports program area. What's in this category is our team travel, our recruiting, our game expenses, and then our equipment as well. While you absolutely hate it for the student athletes, we did have a number of contests that were canceled due to COVID, both home and away, which led to significant savings on the team travel side and the game expense side, home game expense side. The other thing, part of that is our recruiting. Our recruiting period didn't open up until June, so we were able to realize some savings there as well. The other major area there is our other expenses. This is where we had savings in game guarantees, our compliance expense, some other non-team travel, and then really at this time, we still do not have our buildings fully operational. So we had anticipated some expenses bringing everyone back in person in the building, which didn't materialize. So we had savings in both custodial and maintenance. So bottom line, our overall net improvement on our operating budget was just over $6 million better than what the board had approved. I'll call one other note there. My eyes are failing me a little bit. Footnote K there below the bottom line. Just to remind everyone, that's our net borrowing that we did at $35.6 million that we borrowed as part of our 2-year recovery plan to bridge the gap with our losses related to COVID-19 in FY21 and 22, just as a reminder there.
That's it for
It's good news.
FY21. Yeah. Yeah, especially because we just, it's a month to month, maybe Pat would say day to day of what's going to happen next, especially then. And we're not quite out of the woods yet either with FY22, but obviously some things are improving there.
Are there any questions before we move on to fiscal year 2022.
Okay, again, just reminding you, this is the budget that was approved in May of 21. And I don't think there's much of an update since we last reported, but I'll let John go through a couple of the highlights.
Sure. So we do have a net improvement overall. At this time, we're projecting, as Stacy mentioned, it is a day-to-day where we're trying to adapt with the times and deal with the information that's given to us as best we can. But at this time, we are projecting a $2 million increase in our revenues right now. If you remember back in May, when this was approved, this is based on a 50% capacity in Martin Stadium. Obviously, we did much better than that. We still have some opportunities. So as we close out basketball season, it's done, but we're still wrapping up the numbers. We're also seeing some positivity and trending with our baseball tickets as well. So still opportunities for improvement related to ticket sales. Where we did have some regression is in our Pac12 distribution. This is merely a projection, and I'll admit I'm taking a bit of a conservative approach here with this. Just as last year, we had ongoing conversations at this time that finished favorably. There are still conversations at the Pac-12 with our media partners on some more missed contests for this year that could have an impact, as well as still settling out some of the bowl revenues as well. So just taking a bit of a conservative approach, I scaled that back just a touch, but still projecting a revenue increase of $2 million. While we have increased the revenue, we have seen some expense creep a little bit, particularly related to COVID items in our sports programs. We did make a couple of adjustments on team travel to try and mitigate exposure for student athletes, some extra buses, and adjustments to hotels. And then our other expenses, as I mentioned, the savings in FY21, some of those costs that we were anticipating in 21 came to fruition in 22 as we brought everyone back online and got our buildings back, our venues back up and going, and our buildings back up and going in mid-July. So all of that, although they have increased just a touch, we are projecting at this time a net increase to what was approved of $1 million. Again, keeping our ear to the pavement and trying to be as nimble as possible, but feel good with this, how we're at right now.
Good. Questions, comments?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the Pac-12 projection?
Sure. Yeah. We obviously get projections from the league monthly or quarterly, and stay in really good conversations with them. There's just a bit of unknown, if I'm honest, some uncertainty with the lion's share of our revenue from the Pac-12 comes from our broadcast right distributions, our contracts with Fox and ESPN. And when contests are missed, that does have an overall effect, detriment. We're contracted for a certain number of games to provide to those channels. And when some of those are missed, we obviously experience losses on that. Now there's some ways, which they were able to do last year, providing some media spots, do some other things to try and mitigate those losses. But there's just a bit of uncertainty right now. So I'm optimistic that there's going to be improvement there. I really am, but wanted to take a conservative approach given the amount of things that are up in the air.
John, really the big miss is we had one of our bowl contracts was not fulfilled as accurate. That'll impact our distribution. It would have been the Holiday Bowl was canceled. Fortunately, we were able to salvage our bowl game. I believe for the most part where we sit with men's basketball that we were able to make up most of the games that were impacted earlier this year. As everyone's noticed, our men's basketball team was one of the teams that have been playing 3 games a week the last couple of weeks. So to John's point, it's a conservative projection. That bowl loss though it does get split up 12 ways based on the negative side. But overall, we are in pretty good shape as a conference.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
And the last slide here is just a multi-year projection that we'd like to present to you. You can see kind of where we came from and where we are in the current year and 5 years out. And just a reminder, as John mentioned, and those the numbers in there for FY21 was the financing we did as part of the fiscal recovery plan. And then the 11 million is we refunded some debt for athletics. This gives us some breathing room for the next few years. And you'll note that the debt payments reflect the repayment of those. So if there are any questions, just let me know.
Just talk us through a little bit the how you feel about the accumulated deficit, over time, and sort of where you think that's going looks like it's kind of going to stay pretty steady. I know we were trying to dig out of that hole ultimately. So
Sure.
COVID threw a wrench in that plan, but
Yeah. Well, I think step one was to not deficit spend. That was, the first part of the recovery plan, and then using our debt capacity to be able to buy us that time. I'll give you my opinion. What we need to do is enable athletics to start building their own reserve so that when they have the up and down years, they're absorbing it themselves and not from the university or from other auxiliaries, which had happened in the past. So this is a long-term solution. And I know that there's, some discussion about repaying that reserve. I think the best way they could do that is to build their own reserve, which would offset this deficit. And then they get into good fiscal practices over the longer term.
and you think that's practical?
I think it's going to take a long time. And I'll tell you why. I think it's what everybody reads about in the newspaper. That whole landscape is changing. And John and I talking about it a lot, like, well, what will this mean for the budget, or who has to pay for this, or how do we do that, or do you fundraise for this, or does something change? And then, of course, we always end the conversation with, we really hope that the next Pac-12 contract is really good. So, I think it's just something that we're going to have to watch and adjust to. But I think this is a landscape that's going to impact the entire country and college athletics everywhere.
When's the next Pac-12 contract?
Is it 24?
Yeah.
We are, Dave, we're starting discussions with some of our media partners as per outlined in the contract now. And so I have reason for significant optimism that our contract is going to be really, really robust. And that's not taken into account here because you don't want to count money that's not there. But I think we're going to see a substantial positive increase from the Pac-12.
Yeah, so if we can start to approach the same kinds of funding that the schools in the Big Ten and the SEC get, not that we would necessarily get as much as those schools get, but if we could start moving in that direction.
And Pat, any thoughts from you on how I don't want to call it the business of college sports, but how the fiscal realities of college sports, or the Pac-12 realities in particular, are going to shape this picture for you over the next 10 years that you promised to stay with us?
Well, things changed significantly last summer because the Supreme Court ruled against the NCAA 9-0 ruling in what was called the Alston case. And what that did was ultimately force, and I actually have been placed on what they're calling the Division I Transformation Committee. And what that does is, as we look at our rule book, it needs to be looked through the lens of antitrust. The word amateurism means basically nothing based on the Supreme Court ruling. So to Stacy's point, as we go forward, this is a very uncomfortable time in college athletics because of the name, image, and likeness, because of our rule book is essentially obsolete, and when we're working to try to figure out what a new model needs to look like that is legally defensible, that does not trigger antitrust for college athletics. We need to do more for our student athletes. I think it's pretty clear compensation for coaches is way out of whack. So there's a lot of swirling challenges with college athletics. Unfortunately, there aren't great answers at this moment, but as someone who's on that committee, we're working to try to find the right solutions. Kirk is correct. As we go forward, I think there is educated optimism for where our TV rights can end up, where they will end up, that will impact us. I take great pride in the level of fundraising our team has achieved. Ticket sales, John can correct me on this, but we're above goal for men's basketball, women's basketball, and trending that way for baseball right now. And that's a testament to a lot of people, but our coaches, the success of those teams, and having a really active ticket sales staff that's trying to actively move tickets. So, and I think there's even more optimism as things get quote unquote back to normal, that we'll be able to hit the levels that we've been traditionally accustomed to in football. And I think we all seen, it's really wonderful to have a head football coach that is really immersing himself into the community, into campus, and really building some of those bridges that I know we failed at the last couple of years. So I'm optimistic with what we're doing at Washington State, really concerned about what's going on nationally and how that impacts Washington State and the Pac-12. But at the end of the day, we'll find the right solutions that move this athletic department forward.
And I'm very glad you're serving on that committee. Thank you for doing that. That'll give you a front row seat to the best ideas.
Yeah, it's 2 hours a week until August. It's one of those types of committees. Yes.
Oh, boy.
Okay, thank you, Pat, Stacy, John.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you. It's good to have a report that you can kind of see a little light. It's good. And Pat, do you just want to touch upon just briefly a couple of your big successes you guys have had recently with fundraising?
Well, we're still working. We're still actively fundraising for all of our projects, and I know we'll have a discussion here sooner than later relative to moving the indoor practice facility and Champion Center. But we've had a significant number of 7-figure gifts, 6-figure gifts, and that's a testament to a lot of Cougs as we continue to set records for fundraising. And a lot of it has to do with the success of our teams. Women's basketball, hopefully on Sunday for the first time in school history, will make the NCAA tournament for back-to-back years. 6 o'clock tonight, we got a bunch of people in crimson in the stands and on those sidelines. I think we're going to beat UCLA. There's actually more Cougs here than I ever remember in Las Vegas for these games, which is a really great sign for what Kyle's building here. And like I said, it's our student athletes and coaches continue to perform at these really record-setting levels, and the comprehensive excellence that we have across all of our sports right now is really resonating with a lot of Cougs all across this country. So it's really fun to watch.
While Pat's here, if I could also point out on the fundraising, that was a softball pad lift. Pat and his team continue to do a great job where if we look just a few years ago, if we would have had a $15 million fundraising year for athletics, we would have been celebrating and doing all that. Now we're routinely in the 20s. We're where we ought to be. We're not last place in the Pac-12 in terms of private fundraising. We're actually the top half. And I think our faculty and our staff should expect if we're going to have a Division I Power 5 athletics program that we're going to be out there hustling and doing the same things that our peers do and not rely on other sources of money because we don't want to be out there. So we don't have this huge fundraising team in athletics, but if you look at a per person amount of money that they raise, they're doing a great job building relationships, visiting people where they are, and bringing forth a dynamic vision. So it's just easy now to get used to. Of course, they had another year where they raised 25 million or 27 or 30, but there's a lot of shoe leather that goes into that. And it's easy now just to take for granted that that's where it is. So Pat and his team continue to do a great job. And the conversations we're now having with people are things that are, in excess of $10 million. And that was just a fantasy 6 years ago. So come a long ways. And guess what? That fundraising helps us with raising money for the engineering building, raising money for Vancouver, all these other things, because we got people getting used to giving for capital and seeing stuff come out of the ground. And that trickle effect is significant. So good job.
Well, and to Kirk's point, Adam Ganders, Johanna Pfeiffer, myself, we're out here. We did a donor event last night here in Vegas. First time we've done one since I've been here. We've been meeting with donors throughout the day that are here. So it's been great. And just do me a favor, don't tell our baseball coach I struck out with that softball. How about that?
With softball, not baseball.
Yeah.
He doesn't care. He doesn't like strikeouts. So it doesn't make a difference.
I just want to make a comment that I continually am impressed with the synergy and the collaboration between finance and athletics. It's a tremendous team. There's extraordinary work that's being done. And so I think there's just a lot to celebrate. So thank you for all of the work. Okay, so I think you can head back to your meeting.
Your meeting.
It's with Dwayne Brailsford next, so you can guess where that is.
And we're going to transition from this point into future action items. And Stacy is going to stay with us for
Hours.
the rest of our committee agenda. I just want to say that this was previewed at our last Regent meeting, and that was a proactive approach to the cadence of what's happening next, which is this future action item. And then when we're together in May, that is when we are asked to take action around tuition increases and all of the fees associated with this time of year. And so from my perspective, having been in the pre-planning conversations around these items, I'm just really impressed with how much information we have here. And while we're waiting for information and have waited for information, we're not waiting to communicate or talk about tuition increases and the impact to students and to our faculty and to each of our colleges. And so I think it's important that this space here is a time for you to ask questions so that by the time we move into our next Regent meeting, you feel like you have enough information to be able to make decisions and be able to vote. I'm also going to excuse myself in just a few minutes and have Chair Dickinson go ahead and continue to run the meeting as I step out for a work meeting. So with that, Stacey, you have a whole host of items here. So I think the first step is the academic year 2022-2023 tuition rates.
Yes, thank you. And I'll go ahead and go through these. Just a reminder, as we've indicated before, it is future action item. We're trying to bring you more information as much as we can at the March meeting for future action, but also encourage you to read through the materials even after this meeting and reach out if you have questions, because you'll see that there are other programs involved here like pharmacy and other programs that are seeking increases. And I am happy to follow up on questions that you have so that when we come to the May meeting, we can make sure that you've got the information that you need. So this section is broken down into our tuition rates. Then we'll talk about housing and dining rates, and then go to the mandatory fees, which we don't have a number for you yet because those are led by the students, and it's student groups who decide what it is that they want to request, as well as how they want those fees allocated for all of the campuses, and then also the technology fees. So I think we've, for many of you, you've seen this before about the tuition setting authority, and then we'll go through the individual rates for tuition, as well as give you some comparative data, talk about our professional rates, our program, or the increases proposed for the professional programs, and then self-sustaining programs also. The legislature does set the limit for undergraduate resident rate increases, and I think you're mostly familiar with that right now, and it is based on an average by no more than the average annual percentage growth rate in the median hourly rate for Washington for the previous 14 years. So we've kind of, I wouldn't say we've figured that formula out, but we've looked at it enough that we have a sense of what the rate will probably be. And then the Regents approve all other rate increases. So for graduates, for non-residents, for the professional programs. So it's only the undergraduate resident rates that have the limitations that we've been describing. So that's been in effect for 5 years, and you can see that the max rate there on the left-hand column, and then on the right-hand column was what WSU requested and was approved. So the highlighted ones there, that when we were slightly underneath, we've projected that it's likely to be around 2.5% average. It's possible it's going to be higher this year, but I think we were hoping in our January presentation to say, wouldn't it be better to just signal what it would be so that families can kind of think ahead to say, well, over 4 years, about how much will this be? Even with the S&A fees, there is a maximum increase on those, that being 4%. So I think that students and families can think ahead better on those. This is a tuition rate change history, just to give you the sense of how has our tuition changed over the last 10 years at those different levels. So resident undergraduate, non-resident undergraduate, non-resident undergraduate for global online, and then the graduate and online for residents and non-residents. So you can see that in percentages, and then this is in actual dollar amounts. And again, it's not so that you memorize those, but you get the perspective of what we have done in the past. And at our meeting in January, I gave you an indication of the volatility. This is our resident undergraduate rates and how they changed over time. And then you can see those last 5 years have been since the legislature enacted the statute about limiting those, that it kind of smoothed out. So we just thought, well, okay, that looks like you can plan for it a little better. The two green bars are just to remind you, today we are at roughly the same level of tuition that we were charging. I think that's 2015, 16. Mine looks pretty small up there. Just for perspective, because of that large decrease when the legislature and the term bought back tuition. And then for non-resident undergrad rates, it was volatile, and then there was just no increases. And so we made a decision a few years ago to say, well, shouldn't we just treat everybody the same? And, you know, when we were looking at where we stood with other institutions, both our peers, Pac12, other Washington schools, decided to follow that same approach, that we would most likely, unless there was some extenuating circumstance, seek the same level of increase for those other tuitions that the Regents approve, and what we're doing for undergraduate residents. So same here with resident graduate rates and non-resident graduate rates. So it's just, we went from volatile to nothing, and now we're just saying, okay, we'll just kind of keep it at this steady level and see how that helps us. So for perspective, there's a footnote there that undergraduate resident is roughly 75% of the tuition revenue, and these other categories are roughly 25%. So the challenge we have right now is we've had fall declining freshman enrollment, and these are fall census dates. So it started a little bit before the pandemic hit, but certainly as the pandemic hit, we can see that decline. And I want to remind you, this is freshmen. So this is our new students coming in. At the same time, the other challenge we have is transfer student enrollment was down quite a bit. And so for those of you who are keeping track of what's going on with community colleges, that directly impacts transfer students into the university. And then the other impact that we have from a net revenue standpoint is we graduated last May, and this coming May we'll graduate two of our largest classes. So it's that combination of, you've got a smaller class sizes coming in, and then large graduation. So this means that we have to really tighten our belts over these next few years. And that plays into the tuition rate increase discussion, because trying to stabilize the revenues as we go through this is important, even though it's a time period that we all recognize is difficult for students and their families. So this is total undergraduate FTE as of fall census. So it's a little bit more stable than what you're seeing with the freshman rates, but the overall impact that I just described is in those numbers, which includes the graduating classes and the impact on transfers. There is a lot of work going on. I don't know if I talked about this enough at our last meeting, a lot of work going on under Saichi Oban's leadership of really addressing these issues and looking deeply into some of our processes. For instance, our waiver policies. We've just discovered that we've put a lot of those waivers into non-resident students, and we think we need to refocus those on resident students. There's another, it's maybe not unusual to Washingtonians, it is unusual for people who came from other states, and that is you can become a resident for tuition paying purposes after 1 year of attending class. Most states, if you've come to the state as a non-resident, you stay a non-resident through your college career. So that is a pretty significant impact on the revenues, that after 1 year, you become a resident, whether you're a graduate student or an undergraduate student. So those are some of the other dynamics we have to look at as we set tuition rates. Here are some peer comparisons for our resident undergraduates. We've used our strategic plan peers. This is for last year's rates, or the current year rates, as well as Pac12 and where Washington State is there. And so we're on the certainly toward the average or middle with our peers, a little bit above, and then on the lower end for Pac12. And again, this is just for comparison purposes. It isn't necessarily a judgment that it makes us better or not better. There's all sorts of things. It's difficult to compare too, because a lot of states and institutions use differential tuition rates. And so in a lot of these, we just kind of have to find the average to do these comparisons. But it does give you a sense of where we are with the schools that we probably compete with the most. And this is for non-resident. So that's another point I wanted to bring up on starting that steady increase of the non-resident undergraduate rates, is because we are low compared to our peers and others. And same with graduate. That's resident graduate, non-resident graduate. So here's the proposal. It's the same as when we discussed this in January. That's a 2.5% for all of those groups: undergraduate, resident, non-resident, graduate, and global campus. And it gives you the current and the proposed actual rates and the dollar change in that 2.5%. And then for professional tuition rates, so what we do is we put out an announcement that says if you're going to seek a tuition increase, they have to make the proposal. And we've received requests from pharmacy, as well as for our professional programs, and veterinary medicine. And your packet contains quite a bit of information, because everybody has to fill out a template that describes who pays the fee, whether it's graduate, undergraduates, what groups, the justification for increase, the consequences for not increasing, the decision support information, including, average rates, when was your last increase, that type of thing, and alternatives that were considered, and then how these groups that submit are communicating the impacts of the rate increases to their students. They have to reach out to the students impacted and get feedback. And I believe that Med has already completed theirs, but when we come, when you get your packets for the May meeting, you will have all of that testimony in there from the students. And so again, this is where all of the details that talk about, mostly it's these programs are seeking to cover some increasing costs. I think I've mentioned before, the state does not provide inflationary funding, and we're just in a period of inflation. And so when it comes to the labor market, the cost of materials, it's, we're just seeing those cost increases. And I think we will be for a while. And so our programs are trying to adjust to that. And then we also have self-sustaining programs. And when these programs are created, they also set their tuition based on literally the cost of the program, the cost of delivering the program. So the first one up there, the Online Masters of Civil Engineering, the program has been approved, but this is their first year of operation. So you see the 866 proposed is for their first year of operation. Then there's another engineering program in there, which is engineering and technology management. And then they've made some adjustments both to their standard rate as well as their military rate, government employee rate, and student and affiliate rate. So a lot of that is covered in the details that they've submitted in their packet. And then the other self-sustaining program is the online MBA program and the executive MBA program. And again, they're pretty much responding to market forces, increasing costs of faculty, but also in the case of those programs, they're pretty popular and they did not lose enrollment during the pandemic. And so they really, made these programs pretty accessible to students. So why the tuition increase? And I think we have discussed that quite a bit about our state appropriation and how most of that goes toward, it's not restricted, but to dedicated purposes. And in the case of our supplemental budget this year, kind of the unique situation where we're getting compensation, but for our civil service staff, it's 3.25%, which must be funded from the appropriation, and the remainder of that coming from tuition. So to be honest, we've run the numbers at this year's, if we had the same level of enrollment next year that we do this year, the 2.5% could only cover the salary increases. And yet, we have a lot of other expense increases. So that requires us to go back. And as was indicated by Vice President Kerr this morning, I mean, it was a positive shift in how much of that, but gosh, you just think of all of those revenues, and if they could have just funded the full portion, that would have been helpful. But I think we have to be very grateful for the fact that we got this amount in this supplemental year, as well as a generous capital budget.
I have a question as it pertains to the salary increases. Is that based, so are those general merit increases, and are they categorized as that? Or, and I don't know how this works in the world of higher ed, because in the private sector, it's really based on performance.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work within faculty and classified and non-classified staff?
Well, the state doesn't require either. They don't designate what it is. So we are able to manage it the way we see fit. It's either across the board or some portion of merit. We haven't really done that in the past years because the amounts have been rather small, at least since I've been here. I think it's been between 1% and 1.5% once you're into faculty and professional staff. And remember, this is separate from tenure increases. This is an overall general salary increase. So we have that discussion a lot. And honestly, if the increase is in that level of, well, at least above 2%, then it makes a lot more sense maybe to divide up between a merit-based pool and all of that. And then we've also taken an initiative to set aside some funding for equity. And the initial round is for faculty salary equity, and the provost's office is developing a program for that. I'll pause. I think somebody else wanted to speak.
Yeah.
Somebody, but
So this year, for whatever we work with Stacy and us to come up with, we intend to do that as an across the board that all employees get the same amount. We would certainly like in subsequent years to be able to break off some piece of that and do merit. There's a prescribed way to do that in the faculty manual and other places. And I think there's just mutual dissatisfaction with the way it's currently structured. So we've agreed with faculty leadership, and Elizabeth and Stacy, all of us will work together in the fall to put together a better merit-based distribution plan and let everybody know that the annual reviews and stuff that they're doing are going to be directly affecting what the merit pool is. And so we don't try and do something in 2 months where we jam it through and everybody goes, well, you took something that could be kind of good and you made it to something that's just really terrible. So I just want to be really direct with the board. That's our intent this year, is it'll be across the board. And then we're going to work carefully together to make sure we have the right kind of algorithm to break that out. And in subsequent years, because as Colleen said, the whole idea of increases and all that will certainly be a major part of our agenda going to the legislature for the big session coming up next year. So this hopefully isn't a one-year thing we've got to deal with. It's multiple years in a good way, and that'll allow us to start addressing salary issues.
Yeah, can I chime in on that? With the merit raise system that we have currently outlined in the faculty manual, I mean, if the raise is only 3%, And then you're starting to try to chip away and say, well, based on merit, you're going to get a 0.15 extra percent increase in salary. It's almost insulting in a way. And so, yeah, we will revisit this in the fall. I think that we're going to come up with a better, how did you put it, algorithm? Sorry.
And then the third point up there is, it's not that it's justifying the increase, but as Vice President Kerr mentioned, we have a very generous college grant program, and it does cover for, for depending on the needs of the students and families, a good portion of the increase. And again, I don't want to use that as a justification, but just to show that there is some relief there that a lot of other states don't have at the level of the Washington College grants.
To that third point, I think, and we have already started this conversation, so I appreciate it with Sochi, but I think we need to double down on understanding the enrollment impacts that we're experiencing in some of our campuses like Vancouver and Spokane, and when we're feeders, from our community colleges. I think we probably should circle back around as a board and understand that. And then I know that I'm a broken record on this, but we need the plan and the story around Washington State University and a very targeted, segmented, concise marketing campaign using and leveraging these FAFSA opportunities, the Washington College grant. I mean, there's so much we could be doing to actually really generate a pathway into Washington State University across our state. So, I again feel I just can't stress enough that I think we need to not look at this through the lens of marketing a higher education institution and look at it through the lens of an opportunity and an experience that's affordable and open to anyone who wants to come. So, and no, that's my soapbox, but we have an opportunity here. We're in a window that we can do something, and shame on us if we don't figure out kind of how to grab it right now.
Yeah, you're here.
I'd like to just briefly add to that. I've told so many people about this Washington College Fund, and I get blank looks. It's like, the comments is, why haven't I never heard about this? So the state has not been doing much of a job on marketing it as well, but it's a very powerful program.
And when we're 48th, is it, or 49th in FAFSA completion? I mean,
well,
but we can lead that. We can lead the state out of that. So this is our moment.
I had a few questions or thoughts. So back on the enrollment question. So as our total enrollment decreases, what is the relationship to cost? I imagine we have a lot of fixed costs that do not vary by enrollment numbers. So do you have and this today, but I think it would be good for the Regents to know, because partly it guides us to how much investment to make on getting enrollment up, how much we kind of get in hot water as enrollment decreases with our sort of profit margin, if you will.
Sure.
So I'd love to have that sort of math done for us, because I'm sure you sort of have a sense for it at least.
Yeah, it's the last couple of years, it's been a $20 to $25 million impact on our budget. Now, we've managed it because we reduced budgets by 7.5%, actually 10% the first year, and then 7.5% this year. And then as we're finalizing all of our HERF funding, and we did all of the expenses related to COVID. We had 3 tranches of federal funding and some of the state, kind of finalizing that. It was all due in May, and then we just found out we got a 1-year extension, but I think we'll go ahead and do that, because the impact of that is some of this revenue loss is clearly our enrollment revenue loss. And so as we look at that amount of money, how can we use that to help us recover? It is one-time funding, but where it is invested is important because it's really the purpose of the funding. Everybody recognized you're going to lose revenues. You know, our auxiliaries lost revenues. So now a lot of institutions are in the same place as now we've got to recover. So I think it's targeted investments in using that money to help us recover and into those programs that you're talking about, the marketing and taking advantage of that, because we'll be able to, that's money that we're kind of targeting for using in FY23 to use for these purposes. And because it's one-time money, you need to use it well to help develop the programs that we need for the long term.
So I had,
Let me ask it a different way, perhaps. What percentage of our budget is personnel? And if we go back to the fixed cost, variable cost part, you know, a lot of units, the way that they balance their budget is by holding positions open.
Right.
And so I think it's a very large percentage of budget is personnel.
About 80%.
Yeah.
Now, all your compensation and benefit costs.
Right. So I think the key is, as you recover and more dollars come back in, do you simply go back and refill all the positions like you had before? Or are you strategic, if you will, and make sure that you're really careful on how you refill those positions? And that's really our opportunity, I think, coming ahead is the office may have always had 5 people. Maybe they need 3 better compensated, better trained people. They only need 5. Right. We tend to want to just go, we've always had 5. So now let's refill the 2. So I actually think how we come back out of this is going to be really important, controlling the costs and asking ourselves, is this the right place to reinvest in people?
I mean, that's really what we were presenting at our last meeting on, you know, the new budget model is not just a model, it's an opportunity to do strategic budget planning. Right. Yeah. You can actually model what happens if enrollment decreases, by how much and where. Not just these kind of across the board cuts, which is like taking an axe rather than a scalpel. So it allows us to model program by program, campus by campus, college by college, model the investment that you have to put in order to get back tuition. And does that balance out? And if not, how long would it take to balance out? So that's really why I think this is a perfect time. And Stacy and I are still aiming for July. We'll come back to you in May and in June to give you an update. But I think it's a really important time for us to be doing this, because as we do increase enrollment, and we will, you know, Saichi said it would take a year or 2, but as we do that, then the question is, as Kirk says, let's just go back and do what we were doing in 2019. Let's think about how we want to.
Well, I think too, you know, if we're looking at tuition increases, there is a way to offset that entire narrative with these other options, that we are the university that provides you complete access to knowing how to complete a FAFSA, to getting access to your Washington College grant, to getting access to all of these tools. But I also think that we can do a better job of determining who are the students that we want coming to the university, and how are we going and targeting and really marketing to them and creating the right pathway, whether it is through humanities or it's the data scientists we're looking for, you know, it's the engineers. You know, I think a lot of other universities, in particular private institutions, having 3 children that are in college right now, they've gotten really good at becoming very skilled in who they're targeting and why they're targeting you. And I think public institutions to some extent kind of do a blanket approach of who are all the seniors at, you know, Central Valley High School, and send them a brochure and call it good, right? So there's an immense number of ways, to your point with that budget model. If you're seeing enrollment in one area and we know we want that area to grow, and what's our individual marketing plan for that particular college?
Yeah, no, and also what are the ads in personnel that you could make that will automatically increase enrollment, because that type of instruction is highly desired, or that name brand is highly desired, or what have you. So a couple other questions along that line. So the UC system is running into this thing, you know, I'm sure everybody read about Berkeley with their housing situation, and we are not an urban campus in any of our campus locations, really. At least not as constrained as Berkeley is. So it does occur to me that, Californians in particular, who might be going to the UC system traditionally may have a lot of interest in coming here as they all get capped, because that's supposed to cascade across their whole system. And then this thing that you mentioned about the non-residents becoming residents after a year, Stacy, I don't know how widely known that is by non-residents. I mean, they may get pleasantly surprised once they're here, but I'm not sure they're really thinking about that when they're making a decision. And we obviously, I don't know the answer to that, but it seems to me that even if you provided a financing mechanism where you said, we're going to smooth out your year one so that you can, treat this as more of a blended 4-year or 5-year program, that could be really interesting to somebody. I mean, there's so many creative financing tools out there in the consumer space right now. This would seem to be an area that would be interesting for college consumers. And then I also noticed in the write-up on, I think it was the online MBA, what I think of as the vodka issue, that maybe we're not charging enough. And so the quality of the degree is being unfairly evaluated. Typical for an MBA student and an MBA person, business person. Like, I didn't pay enough for this, so it can't be any good. But I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah, I chuckled at that. You gotta, some of that quality perception is also in how comparative we are. And they talked about possibly a missed opportunity of not increasing, proposing a tuition increase during the pandemic.
Right, or maybe labeling it, online MBA platinum or something, and the black card, or something. But it goes back to Marty's basic point, I think, that the marketing piece here, there's just so many messages targeted at specific audiences that we, I think, collectively as a board hope our revenue side of the house is thinking about.
Do we have opportunity to co-op market, like with PNNL, for example? Because again, the cachet and credibility that comes, or with like an Energy Northwest that we heard from today, there's things like that. If a student is looking and has an interest in energy, right, and forward-looking companies, and that you can truly co-op and co-market with them. I don't know if you have rules around being allowed to do that from a state institution standpoint or not, Phil, but.
I think that would be something we'd have to explore, both the federal government and as a state entity. But the issue, as we discussed at our last meeting, is we really don't have a budget to do marketing of any type. So
yeah, it does start with money.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think, as we talk about this idea of investment, I think this is exactly the right conversation to be having at this time. But certainly, I think that is something that we look at, whether it be recruiting students or perhaps recruiting employees and faculty members, to talk about that partnership we have with National Laboratory.
Mr. President, I've never seen an occupation where people don't talk to their peers. So what are the range of things that your peers are thinking about? They know they're all looking at the same issues. They're all probably having to chew through. And it's not like you develop a consensus, but what are they thinking at the moment in regards to tuition increase, no tuition increase, if there's just no. I know you all talk informally. It's okay. I always thought it was great therapy when I talk to my peers.
Right.
So what is the range of things that they're thinking about?
Right. I would say, thanks, Ron. It's a great question. The FAFSA completion is probably number one on most of us. And you've got to really look in the state and break the publics into a little bit different. I mean, University of Washington is an elite public university. I don't mean that we're not elite, but all they do is go deeper to their pool to make their freshman class. So they're not impacted the way some other folks are. Now, they may argue, well, we didn't get the same quality or whatever, but largely they're not going to see the same number decrease because of their academic stature. But we're all worried about the low FAFSA completion rate and the fact that if you can't get students to fill that out, it is really, really difficult to worry about the state need grant and our kind of stuff. And that's really a necessary first step. So a lot of us are really pleased the state is providing some resources in that, because that's been a constant thing. The second is we're all seeing those curves, and you want to really look at the devastation that COVID caused all of us. And it's pretty apparent when you're just watching those things drop like that. And where are we losing? It's the most vulnerable students, the most vulnerable population is where we're dropping it off. And you just feel like we're making gains. I don't mean just financially, all of us, that we're getting to these places in the state and giving education and opportunity for families that might not otherwise see it. And I think most of us, we just sort of lost all of that ground in 2 quick years. The third thing on tuition is there's just the reality is that you can never, if you say, let's do 0 because it would be better now, there is 0 mechanism to make that up in the future. We can't go back to the legislature and say we were 0 for 2 consecutive years, and now we think in a position we need to do 6%. I'm just making a number up. They'll go, nope, you're capped, and you lost that opportunity the last couple of years. So the good news is the legislature keeps it down and much more reasonable. It's tied to something. But the reality every president faces is if you don't do it, you lose those dollars and you got no chance, regardless of what the economy does, to go back and make it back up again. So I think there's a sense of inevitability. The president's all talk to say this may be what we like to do. This is fiscally what we know we got to do. And I suspect we'll be the lowest in the state if this rate. I know most of the others are going to max it out. So now 0.3 percentage points, we could, does that make that much difference? Probably not.
We could totally blow it up and make it a campaign.
Right. I knew that was coming, but so Ron, I think those are the things. And then the final thing that I think presidents talk a lot about is we don't know what the true impact of COVID has been on our faculty and staff. I think we're not that naive to think, oh, everything's just going to go back to whatever. I think it's the long-term impacts on fatigue, people's general viewpoint and outlook on organization, life, living in the state, all this. We're not sure where that's going to be. And after 30 years doing something that feels uncomfortable to not have some sense of where you think that is. But that's I would say, we presidents of the state, we talk every other Friday for 30 minutes to an hour. It's a scheduled phone call. And we've set a tone of we're going to share and we're going to talk what works and what doesn't work. And it's been a really good relationship the 6 schools have had.
Thank you.
So Stacy, this is a great conversation. We have about 10 minutes and you have several things to kind of get through. So Shane, did I interrupt you there?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw one thing out when we're talking about non-resident students. I've been thinking a lot about them with this proposed tuition increase, because they will really be impacted the most when we're looking at 2.5% of 26,000 is significantly more than 2.5% of 10,000, right? Or in those ranges. And even though there is this opportunity for students to become residents after a year, it's not an automatic procedure. There is that administrative burden of establishing residency and then submitting proof, and there's timelines associated with that. And I would argue that probably many students are not familiar with that and are perhaps don't have the support or the guidance to go through that process. And so, and then lastly, that those are also the most vulnerable students in terms of we talked about this the college grants, but those students are not eligible for that, right? And so that's just something that's weighing on my mind when we're talking about that, is the impact that, and again, that is, like you said, 75% of revenue comes from undergraduate resident students, right? So it is a smaller percentage of part of that 25%, which is something I wanted to throw that out there to be thinking about as we're having this conversation.
Yeah. And I think it's the strategy, and we talk about that with Saichi, is what is our strategic goal, and then how do we manage it? Do you want a certain percentage of non-residents, and then how are you going to help them through waiver programs and those types of things? So very holistic approach. Okay, I'll move on. I'd like to bring our Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Dr. Taylor, up to talk about housing and dining rates, since I'm sure you're tired of hearing from me at this point.
Thank you, Stacy, and hello, everybody. Make sure I have the right piece of paper in front of me. So the future action item that will be coming to you all for a vote in May is an increase in our housing and dining rates. You can see the information in front of you. The Housing and Dining Advisory Board, which is comprised of student leaders and a few staff, have reviewed really sort of the current fiscal situation. We did no increase last year, so it's been 2 years since there has been an increase in the housing and dining rates. And they, based on a review of increased in cost, personnel, materials, services and goods, all of those sorts of things, just general inflation, are proposing a 4% increase in the residence hall rate, a $20 per semester increase in the dining base cost, plus a 2.1 to 2.5% increase in the dining account, depending on the program that the student signs up for, and then a 5% increase in the monthly rates for all apartment units. We house almost 7,000 students in all of our housing and residence halls and apartments. So that's really what it is. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Can you speak to if what that 4% and the 5%? I mean, what are those rate increases needing to cover from, operating standpoint, maintenance? What are they going to?
All of the above. It really is increasing costs and personnel, minimum wage increases, which affects us in our housing and dining area pretty significantly, because we have a pretty significant proportion of the workforce that is at that minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage territory. So it is personnel costs, it's the cost of good, cost of food, cost of fuel. All of that ends up affecting our operations on a day-to-day basis.
Will this allow us to recoup all the costs of all the increases from inflation and so forth? I mean, I know it's a guess because we don't know where things are going, but it just, it will be still self-supporting and making sure that.
Yeah, that's almost an impossible question to answer. I mean, this will, I think, level set. And we just don't know what the next year is going to bring. I mean, I know I put gas in my car to drive here yesterday, and the % increase, it still may be a good deal for fossil fuel in some ways, but the % increase is pretty significant. I think about what we were talking about the Vancouver building project and just the % that we are seeing in inflation and sort of materials and goods and so on. So we will continue to monitor that through the year, continue to manage costs as best we can. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we have a number of vacancies in the housing and dining area that has actually hurt our ability to provide the level of service we want to provide. Fiscally, it's represented some savings. And so we will see also how our ability to fill positions next year plays out, because that will affect, again, that's that balance. It's good news or bad news, depending on which math you're running. So.
And there's no coffee in French, so, and Leidy, so that's bad news.
Bad news is if you go to Leidy starting next week, there won't be coffee until summer semester. We are planning on opening that up again in summer semester.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you for your patience, Ellen, and getting up here with us. So next up.
Yeah, I will try to move through these pretty quickly, because in the case of the mandatory fees, obviously, we're not giving you numbers yet. We're just notifying you that the process is underway. And on our services and activity fees, our tech fee, and then at the end I'll have Ellen speak to the student direct fee. Again, I'm just giving you some information about the fees charged by each of the campuses currently. And then as we go through these processes and the students determine what it is they want to charge, what it is that they want to accomplish, and then within that 4% limit, what they want to do. And so again, that's kind of, that limitation is managed by statute as well as by the student groups themselves. And this is the historical of what the changes have been over the last 10 years, both in terms of dollars and percentages. and then we can talk about the student rec center fee.
And it's really very similar to the services and activities fees. The Student Recreation Advisory Board on Pullman has started meeting. They've been in deliberations. They are seriously considering a request for an increase for the student recreation fee. They don't know the amount yet. They're still deliberating about that and making decisions, but I do predict that we will be requesting approval of an increase in the student recreation center fee when you all meet in May. That fee has not been increased in 5 years. And so there's some maintenance and some equipment replacement and some other things. And then again, the costs we've already talked about in terms of personnel and goods and services and so on.
Yeah, that's the history of that fee. And then you'll go through the approval of how we allocate that money that will be forthcoming. These are just the past allocations, as well as the technology fee, which is only charged by 2 campuses, Pullman and Vancouver. And I don't know if they're considering an increase. It's been $20 since it came into effect, and this is how the money's been allocated. And we've already had a lot of discussion, so I guess we can skip that slide.
Any other questions, comments for Stacy or Ellen while we have them here? It's always a great afternoon with you, Stacy.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Great information. Okay, at this time, it is, what time is it? It is 4:15. Jeez. Regents, we're going to take a short break, but just give yourselves a chance to do a couple things, whatever you need here. Let's reconvene at just about 4:25, and we'll come back then. Okay, 10 minutes.
Everybody doesn't come back.
I know
We're out of here.
Meet them off. Yeah. But yeah, that's
Okay, so payroll. So
maybe it's I know it.
I don't
know. No.
Very fair question.
Well, there's also
That's why I was like.
I figured.
But I just, as far as having the room clear out, and then we can announce it when we go live.
Sorry. So the cameras are off?
Oh, right, they will be. We're live. We're live. All right, welcome back. At this time, the Regents will now hold an executive session to discuss with legal counsel litigation or potential litigation in which the university is or could be a party and the performance of a public employee. The session will be closed. The executive session will conclude at approximately 5:30 p.m. unless it is extended by further announcement. If any action is taken as a result of these discussions, it will be taken tomorrow during open session. Immediately following the executive session, the meeting will adjourn. Thank you.
I knew that we got
Are we
to
good?
close. Oh,
Are we live?
okay.
Oh, okay. We are officially adjourning our WSU Board of Regents meeting on March 10th, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning